The corridor outside the courtroom snapped into silence as Officer Simmons yanked Monica Jackson's arm, the sharp clang of her steel-toed boot against the marble echoing like a whip crack. He barked back against the wall now and trained his flashlight harshly on her dark skin, its beam slicing through dignity. Monica's breath hitched as mocking snickers rippled from the assembled officers, an unspoken verdict delivered before a word was uttered. In that instant, the prejudice was palpable, a high-ranking Navy SEAL reduced to a suspect by the color of her skin. If injustice stings, this moment burned. Drop a comment if you've ever stood up against bias, hit subscribe to join our fight for truth, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next shocking chapter. The heavy oak doors of Judge Grayson's courtroom groaned open, and the hush that followed felt less like reverence and more like a held breath waiting to exhale in shock. The judge himself, an imposing figure draped in black robes, surveyed his domain with a measured calm. His gavel lay silent upon the bench, an unspoken promise of order yet to be enforced. Monica Jackson entered like a specter of composure, her uniform replaced by a crisp white blouse and tailored slacks. But her posture still spoke of command. She paused at the threshold, shoulders squared, chin lifted. Her braided hair shimmered with a sheen that caught every stray ray of sunlight filtering through stained glass windows. The courtroom gallery leaned forward as one organism. Journalists rifled through notebooks, townspeople exchanged sideways glances, and a handful of Simmons's colleagues settled into the back row with a conspiratorial air. At the plaintiff's table, Officer Bradley Simmons sat smugly adjusting his tie, as if preparing for a performance. His uniform was immaculate, his boots polished to a mirror shine, but it was the smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth that spoke volumes. He knew the power dynamics at play, black woman accused of assaulting a white officer, and he intended to exploit every unspoken prejudice the courtroom held. Monica's lawyer, Benjamin Carter, fidgeted with his folder. Fresh out of law school, he'd spent sleepless nights preparing for this opening salvo. Yet as Monica met his anxious gaze, her calm, almost imperceptible nod steadied him. She needed no encouragement. She already understood the battlefield. Judge Howard Grayson cleared his throat, robes rustling. State versus Jackson, he intoned, voice resonant. Officer Simmons, you may proceed. Simmons rose with an air of entitlement. He strode to the witness stand as though he owned every inch of polished wood. Taking the oath with theatrical flair, he turned chest thrust forward and began, "That evening I responded to a disturbance call on Magnolia Street. I encountered the defendant loitering outside a closed shop. When I asked her what she was doing, she became hostile, refused to identify herself, raised her voice, and when I tried to calm her, she struck me in the chest and reached for my weapon. I had no choice but to restrain her. Every word landed like a gavel blow." Simmons paused to let the implication sink in, a law-abiding officer assaulted by a belligerent woman of color. Beneath his composed exterior, Monica cataloged each flicker of his eyes, each imperceptible tremor in his knuckles. These were the subtleties of truth details most would overlook. The courtroom murmured. Carter rose, voice quivering with controlled urgency. "Your Honor, we'd like to cross-examine Judge Grayson," cut him off. "Save it for later. Mr. Carter, let's hear both sides first." Monica's lips twitched ever so slightly. Later. She had every intention of letting truth unravel Simmons' narrative at her own pace. Once Simmons retook his seat, Monica leaned toward Carter, whispering, "Stay focused. The facts will speak." He swallowed and nodded. His hands clenched around his briefcase as the prosecutor rested his case. The gavel banged once, and the courtroom dissolved into whispered speculation. When the judge finally addressed the defense, Monica rose and ascended the stairs to the witness stand. Every step was deliberate. The hush that fell was suffocating, broken only by the soft scrape of her shoe against wood. She settled into the seat, folded her hands on the railing, and waited. "State your name for the court," said the prosecutor, a man whose polished suit bore the confidence of many victories. "Monica Jackson," she replied, voice low but unwavering. He smiled thinly. "Miss Jackson, Officer Simmons claims you assaulted him. Can you explain your actions that night?" Monica inhaled, gathering each syllable. "I was checking my phone for directions, standing on a public sidewalk. Officer Simmons approached flashlight in my face and demanded my identification without cause. When I asked why he accused me of being uncooperative, I did not resist, only asked him to explain. A ripple ran through the gallery. The courtroom had never seen this side of the story. The prosecutor pressed on, his tone shifting to predatory. "Isn't it true you struck him?" She shook her head, eyes never faltering. I told him I wouldn't consent to being touched. When he grabbed my arm and slammed me against his car, he called me, quote, "a woman who needs to learn her place." His body camera conveniently malfunctioned at that moment. Silence. The word malfunctioned gleamed like a neon sign over Simmons's testimony. A murmur of disbelief rose only to be stamped out by the judge's gavel. "Order in the court," Grayson's voice boomed. Monica offered no reaction. She'd expected shock. This was just the beginning. The judge declared a recess until morning. As the crowd filed out, Simmons's colleagues whispered amongst themselves, eyes darting to Monica with newfound uncertainty. Carter approached her, hesitance dripping from every step. "What's your plan?" he asked under his breath. Monica's gaze was unapologetically fierce. "Tomorrow, we change everything." She strode past him, back ramrod straight, leaving Carter clutching his briefcase and questions. Outside sunset cast the courthouse in molten gold. Monica paused on the steps, scanning the horizon. She'd weathered firefights under darker skies. This courtroom was just another front line. As dusk settled, Carter retreated to his office, replaying her testimony in his mind. He'd believed in the power of law, but until now, he'd never seen justice wielded with such precision or such quiet, lethal resolve. Tomorrow he'd learn what it meant to stand alongside a warrior who fought for every breath of dignity. And as the courthouse emptied, its breath held in anticipation of tomorrow's reckoning, Monica Jackson disappeared into the gathering night, undaunted, unbowed, and ready to unleash the truth. Officer Simmons stood straight-backed and immaculately pressed in his navy blue uniform, as though he belonged atop a stage rather than behind a witness stand. The courtroom lights gleamed off his badge, creating a halo of authority around him. He swept his gaze across the spectators, letting his eyes linger on each face townsfolk reporters. Curious onlookers then settled on Monica Jackson with a triumphant glint. In that moment, he was the embodiment of law and order. He cleared his throat before speaking, but even that simple action felt grandiose. On the evening of May 12th, he began, voice measured but resonant. "I responded to a disturbance call on Magnolia Street." His words rolled out, punctuated by deliberate pauses that gave the impression of someone recounting a heroic saga. Simmons painted the scene with broad strokes: dim streetlights, a closed convenience store, and a lone figure, Monica Jackson, standing in the shadows. He leaned forward as if sharing a secret no one else deserved to hear. When I approached her, he said she was loitering. His emphasis on that word carried more weight than simple description. It was a verdict. He paused, scanning for nods from fellow officers seated behind him. A faint smirk spread across his lips. I asked her what she was doing there. The room was silent, hanging on every syllable. Simmons' voice rose slightly, adopting a theatrical cadence. She refused to identify herself. Then she became hostile. He used air quotes hostile, as if quoting her exact words, though no one could be certain. The gallery shifted uneasily. There was something performative in the way he held himself, the same way he'd surely held a flashlight to passers-by at midnight. I attempted to de-escalate. Simmons' continued hands clasped behind his back, but she struck me in the chest. He thumped a closed fist against his own chest, the sound hollow but commanding, hard enough that my uniform badge dug into my skin. A collective intake of breath rippled through the courtroom. He let that moment linger, leaning even closer to the microphone. And then he said, voice dropping to a gravelly whisper, she reached for my service weapon. The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Faces in the gallery went pale. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others scribbled furiously in their notebooks. The notion that a civilian, especially a black woman, would try to seize a police officer's weapon was explosive. Benjamin Carter felt his pulse spike. He glanced at Monica, seated at the defense table, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her profile was serene, untroubled, even, but Benjamin knew better than to trust appearances. As Simmons continued, Benjamin felt the weight of each word like a physical blow. "I had no choice," Simmons said, rising to his full height. "I was forced to restrain her." He demonstrated a firm grip on imaginary wrists, then mimed hauling someone backward. I placed her in handcuffs and read her rights. He reenacted the gestures with mechanical precision cuffs, clicking rights recited. Each motion was rehearsed as though he'd performed this scene countless times. From the back row, whispers fluttered like startled birds. The judge observed in silence, taking notes with deliberate slowness. Monica's lips remained a thin line, but Benjamin caught a flicker of disdain in her eyes. She was listening, cataloging every lie and exaggeration. Simmons leaned in, resting both hands on the witness stand. When I got her into the patrol car, he added, she continued to be uncooperative, refused to answer questions, and even tried to kick out the window. The image he painted was cinematic, a defiant prisoner thrashing against her metal cage. He held up an arm mimicking a wild kick. The prosecutor's assistant passed Simmons a document, and he glanced down briefly, straightening his tie. This display of control only heightened the drama, a calm, composed hero quelling a violent threat. Then Simmons paused, as if remembering something crucial. Unfortunately, he said, voice taking on a somber tone, my body-worn camera malfunctioned at a critical moment. He tapped the side of his head, motioning an electronic failure. I'm told it's an intermittent issue. Sometimes it shuts off when there's heavy radio traffic. The courtroom reacted instantly. A murmur rose, half skepticism, half shock. Carter's heart pounded. He'd suspected this excuse, but hearing it aloud sent a chill down his spine. He whispered to himself, malfunction. It sounded like a punchline in a bad crime drama. Simmons straightened, regaining his steely composure. But rest assured, he said, voice firm, I did everything by the book. My notebook contains my observations. He tapped a thick leather-bound journal at his side. It's all documented statements times distances. He offered the notebook to the bailiff, who accepted it with solemn gravity. Simmons sank back into his chair, crossing his arms. The gallery leaned away as if exposed to a sudden draft. Benjamin felt sweat bead on his forehead. The stage was set, a seasoned officer wounded in the line of duty versus a defendant with no evidence to the contrary. The judge cleared his throat, breaking the spell. Officer Simmons, he said. Voice clipped. Thank you. You may step down. Simmons gave a slight nod as if he'd just won a battle, then strode back to his seat with practiced ease. His fellow officers nodded in silent salute, some with genuine respect, others with a guarded wariness that betrayed doubt. Monica remained seated until the last echo of Simmons's footsteps faded. Then she exhaled quietly, a gust of calm in an otherwise tense atmosphere. Carter watched her, his own resolve hardening. He had seen the cracks in Simmons' performance, the overemphasis, the dramatic pauses, the implausible camera failure. Monica had too, and now the real fight began. As the courtroom resumed, the prosecutor rested the state's case, and Carter rose, straightening his jacket. He approached the bench, voice steady. Your Honor, the defense is ready to proceed. Judge Grayson inclined his head, and the courtroom braced itself. For Monica Jackson, this grand opening was just an opening salvo, a parade of lies waiting to be shattered. She had witnessed enough injustice to know that a single story, no matter how convincing, could crumble under the weight of truth. And as Benjamin's footsteps echoed toward the jury, Monica's eyes locked on Simmons, who returned her gaze for the first time without arrogance, only uncertainty. In that moment, the tide shifted imperceptibly. The gallery, once eager for spectacle, now sensed vulnerability in the plaintiff's camp. The judge's impartial facade hinted at curiosity rather than skepticism. Even Simmons's colleagues in the back row shifted trading glances that spoke volumes. Perhaps this wasn't the straightforward victory they'd anticipated. The courtroom lights glowed overhead, illuminating a battlefield of words and wills. Monica sat tall, shoulders squared, the ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth. She hadn't spoken yet, but the real testimony, her truth, was ready to unfold. And as the hush settled once more, it was clear that Officer Simmons's grand opening had set the stage for a reckoning he could never have predicted. Benjamin Carter's heart thudded in his chest as he rose from the defense table. The echo of his chair scraping against the polished floor seemed unnaturally loud. He'd spent nights poring over case law and practicing his questions, but nothing prepared him for the weight of this courtroom. Officer Simmons's testimony had landed like a bombshell, and now Benjamin was expected to disarm it with little more than his own voice. He cleared his throat, adjusting his jacket, as if that simple movement could steady his nerves. Your Honor, he began. voice steady but firm. "We would like to—" Judge Grayson's stare cut him off mid-sentence. The judge's silver hair gleamed under the high-pressure lights. He leaned back in his chair, fingertips steepled. "Mr. Carter," he said, tone neutral yet unmistakably final. "We've heard the state's opening. If you have a specific objection, please state it concisely." Benjamin swallowed, the knot in his throat tightening. He had the perfect objection textbook material. Officer's testimony about the body cam malfunction was hearsay until he introduced the cam's maintenance log. But the judge's patient expression made it clear he wasn't in the mood for a lecture on electronic evidence. The gallery watched him, anticipation crackling like static in the air. Reporter pens hovered above notepads, townspeople leaned forward, and Simmons himself sat with arms folded, watching Carter's struggle, as though savoring a punchline. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Your Honor, the officer's statements regarding events not captured on camera are speculative. We request leave to cross-examine on the camera's operability." The judge tapped his gavel lightly, a single tap that felt like a hammer blow. "Not now, Mr. Carter. You will have your turn on cross-examination. Sit down." Benjamin exhaled a short, sharp burst of air that tasted of frustration. He lowered himself back into his seat, every movement deliberate to mask the tremor in his hand. Monica, seated beside him, turned her head slightly. Her eyes, calm and dark, met his. She offered a small nod. Not encouragement exactly, but a quiet assurance. "Hold your fire. Let's hear them out." He forced a nod in return, pressing his palms against his thighs to anchor himself. The gavel's echo faded, replaced by the murmur of the gallery. Carter strained to catch snippets of conversations. "Did you hear that?" He looked rattled. Cross-examination's coming. Each whispered speculation felt like another weight added to his shoulders. Across the room, the prosecutor smirked. He flipped through his file, pausing to glance at Carter's notes, a smug acknowledgement that he'd succeeded in throwing the young lawyer off balance. Carter clenched his teeth, determined not to let that intimidate him. He breathed in slowly, recalling every piece of evidence he had. The bystander's video. Monica's unwavering composure, the seal records tucked away for the perfect moment. He refused to let Simmons's theatrics be the end of the story. Judge Grayson cleared his throat, bringing the courtroom back to order. "Ms. Carter, Mr. Carter," he corrected himself with a brief lift of an eyebrow, a sign that he'd half forgotten the young attorney's name. "Already. We will proceed with the defense's case after Ms. Jackson testifies. Until then, the gallery will observe decorum." As the judge settled back, Benjamin felt the stares of dozens of eyes. He caught the jury's attention. 6 faces turned toward him, expectant but impartial. He saw a middle-aged teacher with a furrowed brow, a young man with red hair tapping his fingers, and he realized that none of them knew what was at stake beyond the facts he would present. This wasn't about his inexperience. It was about truth. He glanced at Monica again. She was perfectly still, posture rigid, yet graceful, chin lifted. The silence she radiated felt almost sacred. Benjamin wondered what she saw in him: hope, doubt. He couldn't be sure. But he knew one thing: she trusted him to speak on her behalf, to stand firm when the spotlight shone brightest. The room's tension coalesced into a kind of waiting breath. Benjamin watched as the bailiff stepped forward, signaling the defense to call its first witness. Not an expert, not a character reference, but the defendant herself. Carter's pulse quickened. Monica would take the stand, and he would finally have his chance to lay the groundwork for cross-examination. He mentally mapped out his questions, each one designed to chip away at Simmons's narrative. What happened before the confrontation? Why was she on that sidewalk? How did Simmons approach her? And most crucially, what did the bystander video reveal? He settled into his seat, tried to silence the internal monologue that threatened to drown out his composure. Let the state finish. Let Simmons ride his wave of confidence. They had no idea what was coming. Judge Grayson called the court to order. The clerk announced, "The state rests. Defense may call its first witness." The words reverberated through the room, startlingly final. Benjamin rose every inch, the picture of professionalism. As he approached the witness stand, the gallery's murmurs hushed. He paused, turned to Monica and offered a brief, reassuring smile. She returned it with a subtle tilt of her head. "Monica Jackson," he began, voice measured, "please take the stand." She stood smoothly, her crisp blouse brushing against her black slacks, and ascended the few steps to the witness box. The bright light overhead framed her silhouette, casting a faint halo that lent her presence an almost otherworldly dignity. Simmons watched from across the aisle, brow furrowed, searching her eyes for any sign of weakness. There was none. Benjamin took a moment, ensuring her microphone was positioned correctly and that her chair was adjusted to comfort. He gestured for her to sit, then returned to the well of the court. The jury's gaze followed him. The spectators leaned forward as if drawn by an invisible tether. "Ms. Jackson, you've heard Officer Simmons's account of the events on Magnolia Street." Carter began, tone neutral. "Is that account accurate?" Monica's reply was almost a whisper, yet carried with crystal clarity. "No, it is not." A stir ran through the courtroom. Carter gave her a moment to settle, then continued. "Let me ask you this. Were you loitering outside that convenience store?" She shook her head. "I was checking my phone for directions to my friend's house." He nodded and pressed on. "And when Officer Simmons approached you, what did he do?" She paused, eyes flicking briefly to Simmons, then fixed on Carter and replied, "He shone a flashlight in my face and demanded my ID." Benjamin watched as the jury shifted, their expressions softening. He pressed forward, guiding her through the sequence of events. With each answer, the narrative Simmons had constructed began to unravel. She had done nothing wrong, had not struck the officer, had not reached for his weapon. She had simply asked, why? By the time Carter concluded his direct examination, the courtroom had been transformed. What began as defense under fire. Benjamin Carter's struggle to mount even a basic objection evolved into a testament to preparation and trust. Monica had spoken, and her calm clarity cut through the smoke of Simmons's grand opening. Benjamin rose to his feet once more, confidence swelling. He addressed the judge. "Your Honor, we'd like to proceed with cross-examination." And as the gavel hovered above the sound block, the unspoken promise hung in the air. The real reckoning was just beginning. Monica Jackson stood beneath the harsh glare of the overhead lights, her silhouette crisp against the polished wood of the witness stand. The courtroom seemed to lean forward in anticipation, as if the walls themselves strained to catch her every word. Benjamin Carter gave her a quick nod from the defense table, his signal to proceed. She inhaled slowly, the only visible sign of the storm of resolve swirling inside her. "I was walking home from a friend's house," she began, her voice low, and measured each syllable carrying intention. "I paused on the sidewalk at Magnolia and Fifth to check my phone for directions." Her gaze drifted upward for a moment, as though she could see the street signs and the flickering lamplight of that night. The gallery held its collective breath, the earlier theatrics of Officer Simmons fading into the background as Monica's calm authority took center stage. When Officer Simmons appeared, she continued, her tone unwavering. "He shone his flashlight directly in my face." She paused, letting the memory hang in the air. The beam had been harsh and disorienting one second. She was reading a text message the next. She was blinded by suspicion incarnate. "He demanded I identify myself," she said, voice steady but with an edge of quiet indignation. "I asked him why he needed my ID. I had done nothing wrong. I was on a public sidewalk." A murmur rippled through the spectators. Even Simmons' fellow officers exchanged uneasy glances. Monica saw it all, the fleeting shock, the re-examination of the narrative they'd built on his testimony. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible lift at the corner of her mouth. The truth, she knew, had a way of settling under its own weight. "He raised his voice," she said, softening her tone, as though recalling something painful. "He accused me of being uncooperative. I told him that I wasn't causing any trouble. I only wanted to know why he had the right to demand my personal information on a public street." She tilted her head slightly, as if speaking to someone standing just beyond the rail. "When I said that, he grabbed my arm." Gasps fluttered like fragile leaves through the gallery. The force of his grip, she explained, had been surprising, sharp enough to make her wince. "He pulled me toward his patrol car," she said, her voice unwavering, "and he slammed me against the side of it." At that moment, the mechanical hum of the courthouse air conditioner blended with the tension in the air. Monica's stillness contrasted so starkly with the brutality of his actions that it felt as if time itself paused. She straightened in her seat, folding her hands in her lap. I did not reach for his weapon. I did not threaten him in any way. I did not resist until after he violated my rights. Her words landed like precise instruments, each one calibrated to dismantle Simmons's story. But when I told him to let me go, he tightened his grip and told me, quote, "Women like you need to learn your place." Silence swept through the courtroom. Even the judge's stern visage seemed to soften as he absorbed her statement. Benjamin Carter allowed himself the smallest exhale gratitude shining in his eyes as he watched Monica own every inch of that narrative. This was her truth laid bare. The prosecutor leaned forward, eyebrows knitting in skepticism. "Mrs. Jackson," he began voice-taut, "you're suggesting Officer Simmons abused his authority. Are you certain of your recollection? Could you have misinterpreted his words?" His question thinly veiled as doubt demanded she second-guess herself. Monica met his gaze unwavering. "No, counselor," she replied evenly. "I heard him clearly." His words were not lost in the chaos. There was no chaos. It was a quiet street corner lit by a single lamppost, and yet in that moment, his flashlight, his voice, his grip, they all screamed intimidation. She drew a breath, allowing the audience to feel the weight of that intimidation, the raw power imbalance laid bare where one uniform met unarmed vulnerability. "Your Honor," the prosecutor pressed, her testimony contradicts Officer Simmons's sworn statement. "We have no video evidence at that moment." Monica's eyes flicked to the judge, then back to the prosecutor. "My phone camera was recording," she revealed, voice calm but resolute, like the turning of a key in a lock. "I didn't know it at the time, but the bystander who filmed the incident captured everything." The mention of video evidence sent a ripple of excitement and apprehension through the courtroom. Simmons shifted uneasily in his seat. The confidence he'd exhibited earlier flickered like a dying candle. Judge Grayson's gavel tapped the stand. "Order," he commanded, darkening the air with authority. The prosecutor's lips tightened and a hush fell once more. Monica held her silence dignified as a statue carved from marble until the gavel's echo dissipated. She pressed on. "The video shows me standing still, hands by my sides, as Officer Simmons approaches. It shows him grab my arm first, slam me against his car second, and it captures his words without distortion." Her words were an accusation cloaked in calm, a declaration that the officer's version of events was quite simply a fabrication. The jury leaned in, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern. Monica sensed their empathy building, the scales tipping away from the officer's grand opening testimony toward something more honest, more human. She blinked once, then met the judge's gaze. "I did not resist arrest. I did not strike him. I asked for respect, and instead I was met with force." Benjamin leaned forward, ready to approach the bench the instant her testimony concluded. He could feel the momentum building, the courtroom's currents all flowing in their direction. Monica's words had laid the foundation. His cross-examination would hammer in the final nails. The prosecutor rose, mouth pressed into a thin line. "Your Honor, we've heard the defendant's version. I object to this line of testimony without proper foundation for the video evidence." His voice trembled slightly, betraying his forced composure. The judge surveyed the room, then fixed the prosecutor with a knowing look. "Ms. Jackson's testimony regarding the bystander's recording may proceed. The defense will address authentication during cross-examination." The gavel followed, sealing the moment. Monica exhaled as though releasing a held breath. Her posture remained unbowed, her expression serene. She had spoken her truth softly, but with unflinching clarity. The courtroom shifted around her, the undercurrent of prejudice momentarily quelled beneath the gravity of her witness. As she stepped down from the stand, Benjamin moved with purpose, crossing to the well of the court to request cross-examination. Monica collected herself, brushing imaginary dust from her hands, though none existed. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. The officer's initial bravado had been tested and found wanting. For Monica Jackson, this calm rebuttal was more than mere testimony. It was a reclamation of agency in a space designed to diminish her. She had transformed from defendant to truth-teller, and as she rejoined Benjamin at the defense table, her serene composure sent a clear signal the fight for respect had only just begun, and she would not be silenced. Monica Jackson's voice dropped to near whisper, forcing every ear in the courtroom to lean in. When he grabbed my arm, she said slowly, "It was sudden, like a steel trap closing on soft flesh." She paused, allowing the weight of that image to settle. The gallery went still. Even the faint hum of the air conditioner felt intrusive. My wrist snapped backward with such force that I saw stars. Before I could protest, he yanked me toward his patrol car. She raised her hand and traced an arc in the air, mimicking the trajectory from sidewalk to metal. He slammed me against the door so hard I thought my ribs would crack. A collective intake of breath rippled from the front row to the back. Monica's eyes flicked to the jury, watching their faces tighten with collective horror. She continued, voice unwavering. I crumpled against the cold steel. Officer Simmons said, "I told you to learn your place," as he shoved me again. Every shove bruised more than flesh. It bruised my dignity. The courtroom felt as if it were pressing inward, drawn by the magnetism of her truth. Benjamin Carter rose to his feet, intending to object, but the judge raised a gloved finger. This was Monica's moment. She didn't falter. "I asked for medical attention," she said. He refused. He cuffed me so tightly the chain dug into my skin. A murmur rippled through Simmons' fellow officers in the back row. Some shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Monica saw it, and it fueled her resolve. I told him I hadn't resisted. He said, "Your kind never resists me." At that, the air in the courtroom turned heavy. The prejudice in Simmons' words hung like a dark cloud, and Monica drove her point home. But here's the truth. My body was not the only thing he tried to break. He tried to break my spirit. She inhaled, measured. And yet, at the moment his brutality peaked, his body-worn camera malfunctioned. The word malfunctioned descended like a guillotine cleaving the air. Gasps fluttered around the gallery. The judge's pencil froze mid-note. Simmons's lawyer sprang from his seat, mouth open, but no sound came out. That single word malfunction tipped the courtroom's balance. Every journalist's pen hovered. Every spectator's gaze flickered between Monica and Simmons. Benjamin seized the moment. "Your Honor," he called out, voice clear. "With your permission, we'd like to introduce maintenance records for Officer Simmons's cam." The prosecutor's face drained of color. He shot a glance at Simmons, whose confident posture had curdled into rigid defensiveness. Simmons' hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on his desk. Monica watched him impassive as Benjamin approached the bench and slid a stack of printed logs across. "These show 6 separate intermittent failures in the past month," Carter explained. "None during an arrest until tonight." The judge peered at the pages, adjusting his glasses. The gallery hummed with renewed energy. Monica rose from her seat, heart pounding not with fear but with fierce validation. She addressed the jury. "When he says his camera malfunctioned, understand that this isn't an accident. It's calculated. It's meant to hide the truth." Her words resonated like a verdict. Simmons' bravado crumbled. His world had just been exposed as constructed on sand. In that courtroom, truth proved stronger than any lie. The courtroom emptied in a hush of whispered theories and shuffling feet, the gavel's final echo still vibrating against the polished wood. Judge Grayson had declared recess until dawn, sending everyone dispersing into the cool night that draped the town like a velvet cloak. Benjamin Carter gathered his notes, heart still racing from the afternoon's revelations. The body cam failures, the whispered slur, the tide turning in Monica's favor. He slid from his seat, determined to find her before the crowd dissolved into taxis and impatient drivers. Outside the courthouse steps were bathed in the dim glow of a single street lamp, its yellow halo cutting through the darkness like a spotlight. The air carried the hush of anticipation, as if the night itself waited for what would come next. Benjamin's polished shoes clicked against the stone, each step echoing loud in his ears, until he reached the top landing and paused. Monica Jackson stood there, silhouette sharp against the doorway's warm interior light. Her braided hair glinted faintly, and beneath her crisp blouse he could sense the same unbending spine that had held firm on the stand. She turned toward him as though she'd known he'd come, and in the quiet that stretched between them, he felt the weight of her gaze, calm, unhurried, infinitely knowing. "You did well," he said, voice low, wary of the night's hush, as though their words might shatter it. She offered a slight smile, almost conspiratorial. We did well, she corrected, stepping away from the door. The night breeze tugged at her blouse and slacks, but she remained unmoved. But there's more you need to know. Benjamin's pulse quickened. All afternoon he'd seen shadows behind her stoic composure, hints of something deeper, something powerful enough to upend the whole trial. Yet she'd held it back, revealing only enough to draw the courtroom's interest. Now under the solitary street lamp, the promise of that secret felt weightier than any testimony. Tell me what you're thinking, she said, folding her arms in a reflex that seemed entirely unscripted. Her eyes glowed in the dim light, the same steady light that had rippled doubt through Simmons's carefully constructed lies. Do you believe the jury will convict based on what we've shown so far? Benjamin swallowed, brows knitting. They're leaning our way, he admitted. The camera logs, your testimony, even the complaints buried in Simmons's file, they've all chipped away at his story. He gestured toward the empty street. But tomorrow, they'll see the prosecution regroup. They'll come in with fresh strategy, doubt, maybe new witnesses. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I need whatever you've been holding back. Monica stepped closer, the light softening her profile. It's not just about what I'll say in that courtroom, she replied. It's about who I am, what I can bring to bear. She reached into the pocket of her blouse and produced a slim, leather-bound folder. Its surface was worn, creased at the edges, like something carried into battle. She handed it to Benjamin as if it were a loaded weapon. Open it. He took it carefully, fingertips brushing the cover. His name was embossed in small, refined letters on the spine, L.C. Monica Jackson. Lieutenant Commander, Navy SEAL. His breath caught. All day he'd sensed her discipline, her tactical precision, her unflinching nerve. Now the title confirmed it. She was more than a defendant. She was a warrior molded for conflict. Your service record? He whispered, eyes scanning the leather. This is classified material. You can't just... She held up a hand. I can. I want you to understand exactly who you're defending and why this isn't just about a false arrest. Her voice was steady, unwavering as the night. We're not merely exposing Officer Simmons's lies. We're exposing a system that allows men like him to wield power without accountability. You need every tool in that folder to show the jury who I really am and what this fight represents. Benjamin flipped the cover open, revealing crisp documents, discharge papers, mission commendations, photographs of Monica leading a SEAL team through a desert haze, folded American flags medals. His eyes lingered on an action shot, a younger Monica face set in determination, firing on target. The memory of her calm courtroom demeanor flashed in contrast. Here was the paradox, a trained warrior serene in the face of injustice, now armed with her own history. Monica watched him silently, as if the folder's contents were self-evident proof of truth beyond doubt. They need context, she said. When you tell them I've served 20 years defending freedoms, they'll see Simmons's words for what they are, the ramblings of a man who thinks his authority is absolute. But authority without accountability is tyranny. Benjamin closed the folder, heart pounding with something like reverence. They'll feel that, he said, voice hushed. But how do we deploy it without overshadowing the core facts? We can't just bombard them with medals and missions. She turned her face to the dark street as if listening for an echo. By weaving it into the narrative, she replied, Your cross-examination showed them my side of the story. Your closing argument must remind them they are judging a citizen who has given her life to serve them. Let them see I'm not just fighting for myself, I'm fighting for every black woman who's ever been stopped without cause, for every bystander who filmed in fear, for every silent camera that malfunctions. This folder isn't just service record, it's evidence of what happens when we stand up for truth. A distant car rolled by, headlights carving two narrow beams through the night. Benjamin tensed, reflexively pulling his coat tighter. Monica's voice softened. Rest now, she said. We reconvene at 9. Until then, gather your thoughts. Study that folder. We win tomorrow, not by surprising them, but by making them see what they already suspect in their hearts. She held his gaze. Will you be ready? He nodded, folding the folder against his chest. The weight of it felt grounding, a talisman of purpose. I will. He promised. I won't let you down. Monica's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. I know. She turned, stepping back toward the doorway. The warm glow behind her beckoned him a reminder of the world beyond these steps of friends waiting of life, paused. Yet she paused again, looking back over her shoulder. One more thing, she added quietly. Trust your instincts. When you speak tomorrow, remember the courage it took to put this folder in your hands. Benjamin watched her silhouette merge with the doorway's light, then slip inside as though absorbed by it. The street lamp flickered once, then steadied, illuminating the empty steps and the silent folder in his arms. He felt the night's hush press in. You could almost hear the truth pulsating in the darkness. Then he turned coat collar up and made his way down the steps, mind racing with strategy and resolve. The midnight secret had shifted the battlefield. Tomorrow, they would claim victory. Benjamin stood on the gravel driveway, tugging at the collar of his suit jacket as though it might somehow shield him from the gravity of what lay ahead. The porch light cast long shadows across weathered oak planks, and in the quiet of the evening, his own heartbeat sounded intrusive. He raised his hand and knocked once, twice, hesitant, as if daring the walls to crumble under the truth he was about to uncover. The door swung open on a gentle creak, and Monica Jackson appeared in the frame. Gone was the courtroom's polished blouse and tailored slacks. Now she wore an olive green sweatshirt and faded black leggings, as though stepping out of uniform, but never out of purpose. Her hair was pulled back, and her face, touched by the day's strain, still held that same quiet intensity. She offered him a small, knowing smile. "Come in," she said, voice soft but firm. He crossed the threshold into a modest living room illuminated by a single lamp. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with titles on strategy and leadership. On another, a framed photograph of Monica in full combat gear hung above a folded American flag in a glass case. The entire room seemed curated not for comfort alone, but for purpose. Benjamin closed the door behind him and turned, taking it all in. "I've read through every filing and every report on this case," he began, voice low in the hush of the room. "But there's something you've been holding back. I need to know before we step back into that courtroom tomorrow what it is I'm really fighting for." Monica met his gaze and nodded, stepping toward a worn leather armchair. "Sit," she invited, patting the cushion. He sank into it, the leather sighing under his weight. Across from him, she crossed one leg over the other and reached for a narrow shelf. She withdrew a slim leather-bound folder, edges frayed as though carried through the sands of time. Its spine bore only two initials, MCJ. Benjamin's breath caught. Monica set the folder on the coffee table between them and leaned forward. "Open it," she said. His fingers brushed the cover, feeling the grain of the leather. He untied the strap and lifted the top flap, revealing crisp discharge papers stamped with United States Navy and Lieutenant Commander. Beneath them lay commendations for service in multiple combat zones, certificates of valor, letters of commendation, mission debriefs. He paused at a photograph tucked inside Monica in full SEAL gear, crouched behind a concrete barrier in the dust of a desert operation rifle at the ready. "You're a lieutenant commander," he whispered, voice thick with awe. She offered a faint smile, that same unflinching calm she wore in court. "Yes, retired, but still bound by the oath I took when I raised my right hand." Benjamin let the folder's contents wash over him. "This changes everything," he said, eyes scanning a list of missions with names like Operation Silent Dagger and Desert Sentinel. He traced a commendation bearing the Navy Cross. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Monica folded her hands in her lap. "Because the moment I reveal this, the narrative shifts. The jury no longer sees a defendant, they see a hero. And heroes are supposed to be infallible, but no one is immune to injustice." She paused, voice growing stronger. "I wanted you to lead with the facts first. The body cam failures, the logs, the prejudiced words. Once you'd cracked the foundation of Simmons's lies, I would step in and show them the architect." He closed the folder, reverent of its weight in his hands. "You trained for missions where a single misstep means death. You've handled crises that most people couldn't imagine, and you held yourself to the highest standards. Now you face a courtroom that demands humility. How do we reconcile the two?" He met her eyes earnest. "How do we make them understand what your service really represents here?" Monica leaned back, eyes drifting to the photograph above the flag case. The lamp's glow illuminated her reflection in the glass, equal parts soldier and woman. By weaving it into the narrative, she replied, not as a trump card, but as context. When Officer Simmons accused me of reaching for his weapon, he tried to frame me as dangerous. But the truth is, I learned to assess threats with precision, to de-escalate, to survive without violence. That's the core. I did not react because I was trained to stay composed under pressure. Benjamin nodded, turning the folder over in his hands. So we let them feel the contrast. We remind them that the person Simmons faced wasn't an unhinged stranger, but someone who devoted her life to service, someone who answered calls in dark alleys halfway across the globe. If they can see that, they'll realize his lies weren't just false, they were malicious. Monica smiled, a small wry curve of her lips. Exactly. We don't bombard them with medals. We present my record as evidence of character, of discipline. Each document is a piece of the puzzle, not to flaunt, but to reinforce that when I speak of being calm, of letting the truth win, it's not empty rhetoric. He placed the folder gently on the table. And tomorrow, during closing arguments, I'll bring it all together. I'll remind them of the video, the logs, your testimony. And then I'll finish with who you are, what you've sacrificed. He leaned in, voice low. But we need a moment. We need a breath between revelation and justice. Monica rose and moved to the flag case. She lifted the glass top, ran her fingers along the crisp folds of the flag, then lifted it reverently. This flag, she said softly, represents the ideals I swore to uphold. Freedom, justice, accountability. I'm a product of that promise. Tonight you know why I fought so hard to serve. Tomorrow you'll know why I'm fighting for my own rights. Benjamin watched her, struck by the solemnity of the moment. She placed the flag back and closed the case, sealing herself in memory and symbolism. He realized that every detail in this room had purpose: the books, the photos, the flag, the folder. They weren't relics, they were tools. He stood, crossing to her side. Thank you for trusting me, he said, voice hushed with gratitude. I won't waste this. Monica returned his gaze, respect and resolve shining in her eyes. We'll win this, she said simply. Not for me alone, but for everyone who needs to believe that justice can prevail. He felt a swell of purpose rise in his chest. Then let's prepare. I want to practice the delivery, make sure my words carry the weight they deserve. He gestured toward the chairs. Let's go over the timeline, the key phrases, the moment I introduce the folder. She sat back down, folding her hands. After you speak of the evidence, let them breathe. Then when the moment is right, you bring it out slowly, deliberately. Watch their faces as they recognize what they're holding. She paused, then added, and remember, this isn't a bombshell. It's the truth. Benjamin sat across from her, opening a fresh notepad. The lamp cast a warm glow over the table, illuminating their faces with anticipation. As he began sketching out his final argument, Monica watched him quietly, a strategist observing the field before the final push. Outside, the night deepened, stars scattered across the sky. Inside, two allies prepared for battle, not with guns or grenades, but with words, evidence, and the unbreakable spirit forged in the crucible of service. And as the first plan took shape on Benjamin's notepad, it was clear that come sunrise, they would step back into the courtroom not as defendant and lawyer, but as a cohesive force armored by truth and shaped by purpose. Morning light filtered through the courthouse windows in thin slats of gold and gray, as Benjamin Carter and Monica Jackson stepped into the hushed chamber on day 2. The air still carried the tension of yesterday's revelations, but there was a new undercurrent of expectancy, an electric charge that promised the trial's momentum would accelerate. Carter's polished shoes tapped quietly against the stone floor as he led Monica to the defense table. She offered him a small nod of encouragement, her calm presence a steady anchor before the storm. Judge Grayson entered with measured authority, robes whispering against the wooden dais. He acknowledged the gallery with a curt nod and called the court to order. Simmons sat at the plaintiff's table, uniform pristine once more, but his posture was tense, shoulders squared in defense rather than confidence. Carter watched as he met Monica's eyes for a brief moment and saw in them not arrogance but apprehension. Officer Simmons. Carter began as the bailiff swore him in again. Yesterday you testified that your body-worn camera malfunctioned during the incident. Is that correct? Simmons lifted his chin. Yes, sir. The device cut out at the moment I had to subdue the defendant. Benjamin's voice carried gently as though coaxing the truth out. You say this malfunction was an intermittent issue. Simmons nodded. It's been reported to the department's tech unit. It happens under heavy radio traffic. Carter allowed that to hang in the air for a heartbeat, then pressed intermittent yet only during arrests involving you. How many times in your 10-year career has your camera failed under similar circumstances? Simmons's jaw tightened. Not often. But this was an exceptional situation. Exceptional, Carter repeated softly. Yet your maintenance logs indicate 6 recorded failures in the last month alone, none during routine traffic stops or backup calls, but precisely during arrests. Why is that, Officer Simmons? Simmons' eyes flickered. He opened his mouth, closed it, then said, Equipment malfunctions are not always predictable. Predictable? Carter arched an eyebrow. But you're a trained professional. Didn't you have the option to switch to your backup camera or alert dispatch to record? If you truly believed you were threatened, why let a single point of failure erase the record of your actions? Simmons shifted in his seat, and a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Carter pressed on without pause. Your Honor, may I approach the bench? He asked. Judge Grayson inclined his head. Carter retrieved a stack of documents from his table and handed them across. These are the maintenance reports you filed last month, 6 entries noting power loss or system reboot. They document the exact dates and times your camera ceased to function. He turned to Simmons, holding a page aloft. Would you care to explain why your camera only lost power when you were detaining someone? Simmons swallowed. I don't have an explanation beyond what I've said. The prosecutor attempted to interject, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Carter returned the documents to the clerk, then placed a small USB drive on the bench. Your Honor, the defense submits for inclusion in evidence footage recorded by a bystander's smartphone. We request it be played for the court. The judge nodded, and an attendant connected the drive to the courtroom's system. With a hushed click, the monitor flickered to life. The camera angle was shaky hands trembling behind the lens, but the audio came through clear. The jury leaned forward as Officer Simmons' voice cut through the courtroom. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The beam of his flashlight blinded part of the frame, then swung back to catch Monica standing, resolute, hands calm at her sides. Seconds later, Simmons' hand shot out, gripping Monica's arm. The video captured her recoil, a silent gasp, and then his shove that snapped her back against the patrol car's gleaming door. Women like you don't get to question me, his voice snarled, the words ringing with menace. The jury's faces tightened and a murmur rippled through the spectators. Benjamin let the footage play in silence, giving the jury time to absorb every frame, the arrogance in Simmons's posture, the fear edged in Monica's steady stare, the collision of an armed officer's fury with a solitary woman's composure. When the video ended, the courtroom sat drenched in a hush so heavy it felt tangible. Carter stepped back, voice low but firm. Your Honor, this footage directly contradicts Officer Simmons's testimony. It reveals his misconduct and the camera's convenient failure. We submit that his entire account warrants skepticism. The judge gave a deliberate nod. The video will be marked for identification and published to the jury. He tapped his gavel, bringing order. Simmons's lawyer opened his mouth to protest, but even he seemed drained of argument. Simmons himself avoided direct eye contact, head bowed as though ashamed. Monica rose from the defense table, moving to stand beside Carter. The defendant's rail seemed no barrier between them and the truth now laid bare on the screen. Carter turned to her, offering the microphone as if passing a torch. She pressed her hands together, inhaled, and addressed the jury with measured strength. You witnessed how he treated me, she said, voice carrying through every pew. You saw his words, words I will not repeat because they have no place in a courtroom. But you remembered his shove, his aggression, his abuse of power. And you know I did not reach for his weapon. She allowed her gaze to sweep the jury, connecting with each member in turn. This video does what his camera could not. It tells the truth. Soft nods rippled through the jurors. Carter watched as the scales tipped further in their favor. The prosecutor, brow furrowed, rose to reclaim control, but his questions lacked the force to counteract what had just unfolded. The bystander's lens had cut through the veil of authority and exposed the raw injustice. As court adjourned for a brief recess, the courtroom buzzed with quiet urgency. Reporters scribbled new headlines. Spectators speculated in hushed tones. Judge Grayson sat in contemplation, fingertips steepled, as if deciding how to manage the aftermath of such a blow. Simmons remained seated, shoulders hunched, once proud uniform, now looking more like a shroud of defeat. Outside the courtroom, the corridor felt colder than usual. Carter and Monica paused beneath a skylight, the morning sun painting their silhouettes in stark relief. She placed a steady hand on his arm. "That video changed everything," she said quietly. "They've seen his lie unravel. Now it's up to you to finish the job." Benjamin nodded, determination burning in his eyes. "We'll tie it all together in closing. They'll see the pattern, they'll see the prejudice, and they'll remember what they felt when they watched you stand there in the glare of injustice." He glanced back toward the courtroom doors as they opened once more. The moment had come to seize the day's momentum and turn it into a verdict of truth. Monica straightened, resolve etched into her posture. "Let's go," she replied. And together they stepped back into the chamber, ready to press their advantage, armed now with truth, clarity, and the unwavering knowledge that justice finally would have its voice. Monica Jackson rose from her seat with a quiet authority that hushed the courtroom more thoroughly than any gavel. The overhead lights cast her in stark relief, every line of her silhouette crisp as a soldier at attention. She moved with purpose up the few steps to the witness stand, heels clicking against the polished wood like drumbeats heralding a charge. Spectators leaned forward, reporters murmured to one another. Even Simmons's lawyer seemed to hold his breath. Benjamin Carter watched from below, chest tight with anticipation, knowing the moment he'd prepared for all these hours had arrived. As Monica settled onto the hard bench, she allowed herself a single steadying breath. The microphone sat before her, cold metal that would deliver her voice across the room and beyond into every mind that demanded proof of truth. Simmons, seated to her right, shifted uncomfortably, the embers of his earlier confidence sputtering in the wake of the bystander's video. The jury watched, rapt, the gallery silent. Carter stood straightening his jacket. "Your Honor, the defense calls the witness to clarify the nature of her service record as it relates to the matter at hand." Judge Grayson inclined his head, and Carter gestured for Monica to begin. She lifted her chin, meeting the jury's gaze directly, one face at a time, as though speaking to each member personally. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of steel, "I have spoken to you of what happened that night, of how Officer Simmons approached me, of how I was shoved, cuffed, and demeaned. But there is a dimension to my story that goes beyond those moments in the street. I owe you the full context." A low hum threaded through the spectators. Monica paused, letting the curiosity build. Then she said, as if revealing a hidden emblem on her chest, "I am Lieutenant Commander Monica Jackson, retired Navy SEAL." The declaration hit like thunder. Gasps rippled around the marble walls, the echo stretching for an uncomfortable beat. Simmons's jaw dropped. His eyes flicked from Monica's composed face to Carter's relieved smile. The judge's eyebrows rose nearly to his receding hairline. Even the stenographer paused mid-stroke, as though stunned by the weight of her identity. Monica's expression softened, but her posture remained unwavering. "I served 20 years in the United States Navy." She continued, answering calls in some of the most brutal theaters of combat. "I led teams in operations where every second counted, where hesitation meant lives lost. I stood on the deck of ships under missile fire, navigated hostile territory on foot, and made decisions under pressure you cannot fathom from this courtroom." Her voice, soft yet resonant, painted the gallery with images of distant battlefields and the code she lived by: integrity, discipline, and unwavering focus. "In every mission," she said, "I trained to de-escalate conflict whenever possible, to value every life, friend, foe, civilian. Violence was a last resort, never a show of unchecked power. But here at home on a city sidewalk, I faced the ultimate irony. A sworn officer of the law, gifted by society with authority and weaponry, chose intimidation instead of reason." The jury leaned forward as if drawn by an invisible force. Monica let their attention settle before pressing on. "I'm not here to boast of medals," she said, voice lowering, "but to illustrate that when I stand before you today, I speak with the calm born of hardship and the clarity born of training. I did not strike Officer Simmons. I did not threaten him. I was calm because I had been tempered by fire, both literal and figurative. He saw only a civilian and assumed I was powerless. He could not have been more wrong. She paused, closing her eyes for a fraction of a second, recalling the gust of that night's street lamp, the cold of the patrol car's steel, and the echo of Simmons's words, cold, dismissive, cruel. When she opened her eyes again, they burned with quiet conviction. This trial, she said, is not merely about whether I resisted arrest. It is about whether those entrusted to protect us may hide behind a badge and rewrite reality for their convenience. A reporter in the gallery scribbled frantically. An older juror blinked back tears. Simmons's face, once flushed with smug certainty, now paled under the unrelenting truth of her testimony. The judge leaned forward, elbows on the bench, caught in the gravity of her words. Monica let the silence stretch. Then she spoke again, softer still. We've shown you a shaky video maintenance logs lies under oath, but perhaps the most damning evidence is here. She tapped her chest lightly over her heart, where prejudice cannot be recorded but must be felt. Ask yourselves if you met me on the street. Would you see a former SEAL or just another person of color? Would you treat me with respect, or would you assume guilt? The question hung in the air, the jurors exchanging glances as they confronted their own biases. Carter could see the wheels turning in their minds. Monica's voice, steady and unwavering, had transformed the trial from a contest of raw accusation into a mirror held up to society. She allowed a rueful smile. I came home from service believing in the promise of justice on these streets. I believed that here, too, the truth would prevail. Yet I found that the rule of law can falter when confronted with prejudice. This is my crusade, my stand not for vengeance, but for accountability. For every citizen who stands alone on that sidewalk wondering if their rights matter. Tears glistened in the eyes of some spectators. Others stared in stunned silence. Simmons sank lower in his chair, shoulders slumping under the weight of her defiance. The judge's gavel hovered suspended between authority and awe. Monica concluded, voice firm, yet filled with compassion. I stand before you, not as a combat veteran, but as a fellow citizen who demands to be heard. Let this trial reflect our highest ideals, that no badge grants immunity from truth, that no uniform grants license to lie. I trust you to see past the facade and deliver justice not just for me, but for every person who has ever been silenced. She stepped back from the rail, returning to her seat with the same precision that had defined her career. Carter rose, heart pounding, knowing there could be no more powerful testimony. The courtroom exhaled as if humanity itself had drawn in a breath it held in hope. Judge Grayson cleared his throat, breaking the spell. Thank you, Ms. Jackson, he said. Voice gentle but authoritative. You may step down. As Monica descended the steps with the ease of a warrior who had completed her mission, the gallery remained silent in reverence. Carter met her at the table, offering a nod of profound respect. She returned it with a faint, knowing smile that conveyed both gratitude and determination. Outside the courtroom window, morning sunlight danced on the marble facade, illuminating a world that for once felt a little truer. Inside, the scales of justice had been tipped not by spectacle, but by the unwavering courage of a woman who refused to be invisible. And though the trial was far from over in that heroic stand, Monica Jackson had already claimed a victory no verdict could revoke. The courtroom fell into a charged hush as Benjamin Carter rose for his closing argument. The afternoon light cut through the high windows, casting geometric patterns across the polished wood floor. Every eye, jurors, spectators, journalists, fixed on him. Carter took a slow breath, recalling the arc of the trial. An officer's polished tale, a defendant's calm dismantling of that lie, a bystander's video, and a service record no one saw coming. Now all that remained was to tie the strands into a rope strong enough to drag the truth over the finish line. He held aloft a thick manila envelope stamped Confidential Personnel Records, Officer Simmons. The jurors leaned forward, intrigued. Ladies and gentlemen, Carter began, voice steady but charged. We've heard about what happened on that street corner. We've seen the video that exposed the brutality, and we've learned that Officer Simmons's camera malfunctioned at the precise moment he needed a record of his own actions. But there's an even larger story hidden beneath the surface, one that speaks to repeated abuses of authority. He slid the envelope across the lectern, the seal breaking with a crisp tear. Photos, complaints. Internal memos spilled onto the surface. Allegations of excessive force, reports of discriminatory stops, whispered concerns from fellow officers. Carter allowed a beat for the jury to register the cascade of documents. This, he said, pulling out the first sheet is a pattern long swept under the rug. Complaints of racial profiling, a civilian beaten during a traffic stop, a community member left with bruises and no apology. Each file closed without discipline, each voice silenced. Carter's gaze swept the room, finding Simmons's eyes first, then returning to the jury. Ask yourselves, is this an isolated screw-up, or is it the fruit of a culture that allows unchecked power to fester? He held up a second page, an internal memo, noting that a superior officer recommended the complaints be quietly resolved rather than investigated. Here, Carter said, voice rising is the proof that when Officer Simmons's conduct threatened to come to light, the department chose cover-up over accountability. A murmur rose among spectators, but Carter silenced it with a gesture. He lowered his voice, leaning forward like a conspirator sharing a secret. In this courtroom, we had one chance to see truth through smoke and mirrors. We had Monica Jackson, a decorated veteran, a citizen who did nothing wrong, and Officer Simmons, who had every opportunity to act by the book but chose intimidation instead. He let that sink in. We've given you the evidence, the video, the logs, the testimony, and now these files. All that remains is your verdict. Silence wrapped the chamber as Judge Grayson's gavel struck. The jury filed out to deliberate, leaving the room suspended in anticipation. Monica sat at the defense table, hands clasped, her eyes closed for a moment as though centering herself. Carter returned to his chair, breathing deeply. Outside the jury box, Simmons' stiff posture betrayed his dread. Time stretched thin. Minutes felt like hours. Then the door to the jury room cracked open. The foreperson, a woman with kind eyes and a steady demeanor, rose and approached the bench. The courtroom snapped to attention. Judge Grayson nodded for her to speak. The jury has reached a verdict, she announced, voice clear. In the case of State versus Monica Jackson, we find the defendant not guilty on all charges. A collective exhale swept through the room. Monica's shoulders relaxed. A single tear traced down Carter's cheek. Spectators exchanged astonished glances. Simmons's face went ashen, his worst fears realized. The foreperson continued. Furthermore, we strongly recommend an independent investigation into Officer Simmons's conduct and department policies regarding body-worn camera maintenance and complaint handling. A ripple of approval rose from the gallery as the judge acknowledged the recommendation. The court will take this under advisement, he said gravely. Monica stood straight-backed and dignified, her white blouse catching the light like hope incarnate. Carter moved to her side, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. Simmons looked on defeated as Monica gathered her composure. The judge released them, dismissing the courtroom. Cameras whipped to life, journalists surged forward, microphones thrust toward Monica like inquisitors seeking the final word. Outside the grand doors, Monica faced the gathered press. Flashbulbs popped, reporters called her name. She raised a hand for calm, letting the noise subside into respectful quiet. Her eyes surveyed the sea of faces, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of every silenced person who'd ever been denied justice. This verdict, she began, is more than my exoneration. It is a victory for every person who's ever been stopped, harassed, or demeaned because of the color of their skin. It's a message that we will not be silenced, that truth cannot be erased by a flickering camera or buried in internal files. She paused, letting her words echo. I want to thank the jury for having the courage to face the evidence. And I want to thank my lawyer, Benjamin Carter, for believing in me when it felt like the world had turned its back. Reporters scribbled furiously. Monica's calm conviction radiated through the crowd, a beacon of resilience. But our work is not done, she added. We must continue to demand accountability from those sworn to protect us. We must ensure body cameras are reliable, complaints are heard, and power is never wielded without responsibility. The flash of cameras intensified as Monica turned to Carter, offering him a determined smile. Together, they walked down the courthouse steps, a united front against injustice. Reporters hustled alongside, voices clamoring for comments, but Monica's presence commanded silence in its wake. At the bottom of the stairs, she paused, glancing back at the towering facade of justice she'd reclaimed. Then, facing the cameras once more, she delivered her parting affirmation. Today, the truth marched out victorious, and it will continue to march until every voice is heard. With that, she and Benjamin stepped into the sunlight, where the glare no longer felt harsh, but instead glowed like promise fulfilled. Passers-by paused to applaud. Strangers offered nods of respect. In that moment, justice wasn't just a concept. It was a living thing moving through the streets, carried on the strength of a woman who refused to be wronged in silence. And as they walked away, the courthouse stood behind them as both witness and monument, a place where the truth once buried had finally broken free.